Welcome to Against Social Justice, episode 4. Why There Must Be Nazis and Everywhere. Are the social justice advocates correct? Are there indeed Nazis, or even neo-Nazis, everywhere in America and other parts of the world? We should be running into them, accidentally, and all of the time. If they were everywhere, right? There should be one behind every tree. Well, no, of course, this is not the case. So maybe that's not what they mean. Perhaps they see Nazis like hiding in plain sight as ordinary people who are skilled at hiding their fascism. Perhaps there is a vast underground of people who are just waiting for the right moment to express their fascism. They probably even communicate with secret words and even hand signals. I wish I were overstating or exaggerating the matter, but these people are serious. Somehow they really do see Nazis everywhere. They are delusional. It turns out no one has been able to expose large groups of neo-Nazis, not even small groups, not even little meetings on Friday nights at the local Elks Club. So why all the attention? Why are the social justice types so worried about the imminent rise of Nazi fascism in America and all over the world? To find out, I have to discuss the beginnings of the social justice movement again and take a tour of Germany, the Soviet Union, and China. So, the Frankfurt School begins in Germany in 1923. They are a collection of intellectuals who sought to understand what went wrong with the world such that Karl Marx's glorious communist revolution did not break out all over Europe and everywhere else. You see, only Russia jumped in with both feet. When the 1930s rolled around, the Frankfurt School criticized the emerging Nazi regime. And of course, that didn't go well for them. So they fled, like many people did at the time, and came, mostly, to America. And American universities were happy to hire them. After the events of World War II, these intellectuals now in America were taken seriously, as they were once there, in Germany, on the ground. They opposed Hitler, and of course they were right to do so. However, they would shift the focus of their communist product to be, primarily, a prophylactic to Nazi fascism, and that would sell their ideas better. For after all, no one wanted American fascism or Nazi fascism to rise again in America or anywhere else. So, chronologically, we were fighting a hot war, of course, against Germany in World War II, so that great evil came first. So did the flood of information about their genocide and horrible means of executing it. So Germany, Hitler, and fascism, such as it was there, had our attention first, and that is going to make a lasting impression. Yet immediately after World War II, America was engaged in the Cold War with the Soviet Union. This was a real enemy, even though, thankfully, it was mostly just rhetoric for the next 45 years. So one would think that this experience with the Soviet Union would have turned all of America against anything remotely Marxist, socialist, communist, just like we were repulsed by Nazi fascism. But it did not. How could that be? What did we know about the Soviet Union in the early years of the Cold War? Well, the information about just how bad it was there, the first place to endorse Marxism and socialism and communism, was not fully in the open yet. You see, they were even an ally in the fight against Germany, and they saved countless American lives by fighting the Germans on the Eastern Front. They were, along with us, truly anti-fascists. But it was bad in the Soviet Union. Very bad. Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union, through the Great Purge of 1937 and 1938 alone, killed what historians now approximate to be between 950,000 and 1.2 million of his own people. The number is hard to calculate and almost surely a low estimate. And although I'm going to focus on the Great Purge, Keep in mind that this happens on the heels of the Great Famine, in which Stalin imposed death by starvation on the people of the Ukraine for having some revolutionary tendencies in the early 1930s. They were part of the Soviet Union. They were his own people. The number dead is impossible to know for sure, but the estimates range from between 7 to 12 million people. As far as the Great Purge, here's a partial list of the groups, again, of his own people Stalin targeted. Moneylenders, relatively wealthy peasants, ethnic minorities, members of his own Communist Party, petty government officials, Red Army leadership, counter-revolutionaries, artists, musicians, especially intellectuals. The people were guilty, or at least on paper. You see, it's easy to convict people of crimes they did not commit when they admit to the crimes, under forced confessions, usually with torture. The Great Purge was not limited to men. It was women and children disappearing as well. And of course, none of this was widely publicized, to say the very least. The official newspaper of the Soviet Union was called Pravda. Do you know what that means? Truth, or at least truth as defined by Joseph Stalin. Although probably a Soviet invention, both the Soviet Union in the Great Purge and Nazi Germany in the Holocaust used gas vans in which prisoners were gassed to death while being transported to mass burial sites. They actually shared the technology. So, how exactly was socialism the opposite of fascism at the time? The killing did not end with the Great Purge. The Gulag system was punishment by sending people to forced labor camps. We do not have the numbers for the deaths there, but the estimates are about 1 million. Some people sounded the warnings of the Soviet evils, and early on, the American journalist H.R. Knickerbocker reported on the executions as early as 1941, but America was focused on Germany and Japan at the time. There was enough evil right there to go around, and apparently we didn't need more enemies to fight. It took a series of events in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a long time after the Great Purge, to uncover the first layers of depravity in the Soviet Union. The first source to get our attention was Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's immediate successor. In 1956, he denounced Stalin and revealed some of the details of the Great Purge. It was hard to ignore Robert Conquest's book, The Great Terror, Stalin's Purge of the 30s, in 1968. He wrote that some Western intelligentsia were intentionally or unintentionally ignorant of the purge. He wrote that French philosopher and influential writer Jean-Paul Sartre took the position that evidence of the forced labor camps should be ignored, so the French proletariat would not be discouraged in their aims. 1973 brought undeniable proof from the source, as it was Russian dissident writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn's famous 3-volume Gulag Archipelago, in which he described the forced labor camps where he was imprisoned from 1945 to 1953. He spoke during a tour of the United States in the 70s. And after that, intellectuals and garden variety communists in America could no longer defend what was happening there. Although it did hit the American Communist Party pretty hard, it wasn't the only thing. I won't go into great detail, that is, of Chairman Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, and this was going on between 1949 and till his death in 1976. Some scholars argue for a death toll there, between 40 and 80 million people. Once again, what went on there was not well publicized by the communist government, but it was a killing of his own people. So look, I do not mean to argue for a ranking of evil during the 20th century, and I certainly would not want to diminish the level of horror that Hitler brought to the world. Yet I do want to call attention to the huge disparity, as it was happening, and ever since, in American culture's perception of the great evil that was the Nazis and the, oh well, what are you going to do about it kind of evil in the Soviet Union and China. One would think that every student in the Western world would be made aware of the horrors in all three places, and then able to dismiss all three of them immediately. We are told that, however, only Nazi fascism is repugnant, and on a curiously daily basis in the 21st century, and therefore we condemn everything that might be linked to Nazis or fascism. Fair enough. Yet, most Americans, when interviewed, cannot describe anything, not a single thing, about Stalin or Mao. They just don't register. The reason for this is more than just a matter of timing, which was my first point, with Hitler being the clear evil long before the propaganda coming out of the Soviet Union and China broke down. The full story, as viewers of my third episode may have guessed, is that the American view, the academic view, by way of the Frankfurt School thinkers of Marxism, socialism, and communism was different. Well, when the American school emigration, or the Frankfurt School's emigration to American universities took hold, it resulted in both a false dichotomy that their theories were the real anti-fascist antidote, and a disassociation between the Soviet and Chinese evils and the kind of Marxism, socialism, communism that they would impose, that the Frankfurt School intellectuals would impose if they only got the chance. You've probably heard the phrase that wasn't real socialism. So no, when the news of the death counts exceeding the Holocaust from the Soviet Union and Maoist China could not be ignored, college professors and their revolutionary students did not just wake up to the ugly truth and thank their lucky stars for living in America. What they did, however, was wash their hands of it, and they dismissed the possibility that the mile-high pile of dead bodies was the result of Marxism, socialism, and communism. No, they said, and they still say, that Stalin and Mao were just abusing in their power. And once again, that was not real communism. They doubled down on the narrative already in place. Hitler and or the Nazis equals the greatest conceivable evil. Period. Full stop. End of discussion. The American people, or at least those college taught, would not be subjected to comparing Nazis with the Soviet and Chinese totalitarianism. That discussion was off limits. Along the way, the Marxist, socialist, communists changed their emphasis from class struggle to struggle between all groups, and thus was born social justice. By selling victimhood and oppression, they added the false premise that fascists were still behind the oppression we see today. And they kept the focus off the existing Marxist, socialist, communist death machines. And of course, their theories were still the cure for fascism, the greatest of all evils. The coup de grace was the gradual redefinition of the words fascist and fascism within the Marxist, socialist, communist academic circles, and now the success it has had across the entire culture. As well as redefinition, these people wished to change the application of the term while retaining the emotional valence of the original term. For few things carry more emotional weight than the term Nazi. It is all equivocation. Yet we should be clear when we speak, and we must be clear about what we accuse people of being. So what actually characterized Nazi fascism, which varied somewhat from the Italian fascism under Mussolini, of course? So the following list is what I'll call the old school definition of fascism. Here we go. 1. Authoritarian rule. 2. Severe persecution of all party enemies. 3. Force or willingness of private sector businesses to do the bidding of the party. 4. Scapegoating of the nation's ills. With the Nazis, that was Jews and homosexuals, gypsies, and other degenerates. 5. Strong component of nationalism and racial superiority. 6. Aggression in their approach to claiming neighboring lands. As you probably have guessed, Stalin and Mao also check all the boxes for the old school definition of fascism. Authoritarianism, persecution of internal enemies, co-opting business for oppression, scapegoating, national racial superiority, though I'll discuss more of the nuance of this later, and aggression to neighbors. So, the old school definition of fascism had to be changed because it was too close to the left-wing dictatorships of the time. So behold, the new definition of racism, according to what is practiced by social justice advocates. Fascism is everything that leads to oppression, or does not explicitly lead to Marxism, socialism, communism, and or all of the goals of social justice. Who could paint one's political enemies with such a broad brush and possibly get away with it? Surely they are more nuanced than that, right? Well, in one of the foundational documents of social justice, Herbert Marcuse wrote in his famous 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance, that consequently, true pacification requires the withdrawal of tolerance before the deed, at the stage of communication, word, print, and picture. Such extreme suspension of the right of free speech and the free assembly is indeed justified, only if the whole society is extreme danger. I maintain that our society is indeed in such an emergency situation, and that it has become the normal state of affairs. There's another concise definition of the new definition of fascism, according to social justice, as it comes from American social justice critic James Lindsay, and it goes like this. Fascism is, in fact, anything that supports or maintains oppression, particularly when that enjoys the support or collusion of either the state or capitalist interests. So if you could travel back in time and could have done anything to stop Hitler's rise to power at any point, in any way, would you have done it? And by any means necessary? Remember, you have been taught that Hitler, Nazis, and fascism were the incarnation of the worst thing we can possibly to imagine. Okay, so yes, you are supposed to answer with the unqualified yes. You would do what you could have done to stop Hitler, and by any means. So now, would you do the same for the next fascist regime? With their new definition in place, like an unquestioned axiom, the social justice advocates answer the question in the affirmative, and vigorously, as in yes, we should do anything and everything we can to stop this kind of contemporary fascism, just as we would have done everything we could have done to prevent Nazi fascism. Except there are no bounds to what should be done, which means, of course, that today's social justice advocates actually endorse and perform totalitarian and fascist actions in the name of advancing their goals. Remember, that's authoritarian rule, severe persecution of all party enemies, force or willingness of private sector business to do the bidding of the party, scapegoating of the nation ills, and a strong component of nationalism and racial superiority, and aggression in its approach to claiming neighboring lands. Except there are no bounds to what should be done in order to achieve their ends. They actually endorse violence, censorship, totalitarian control, and tearing down everything and anyone standing in their way. Especially if it involves fire. Oh, how they love fire. You do remember our American Antifa friends, don't you? They have named themselves anti-fascists. So, everything they do must be good, right? Well, even if that is violence, and even if it resembles Nazi fascism in many ways. We are told that any move in the direction of new fascism is defined as a move to the far right, and therefore part of the problem. Social justice advocates like to call things problematic for this reason. Problematic means impeding Marxism, socialism, communism, or social justice. And it must be at least censored and ideally banned entirely. The key to this perversion of the political spectrum in which Nazi fascism was equated as, or labeled with the far right. When this was installed as part of the very definition of fascism, old and new, then everything to the right of Marx, Stalin, and Mao is to be avoided. Wait a second, do you remember what Nazi is short for? National Socialism. So, yes, Hitler pushed a form of socialism. The difference, if anything, between it and the kind of Marxism, socialism, and communism that we've had is the adjective national. Oh, how they hate national pride. To get around this, social justice advocates claim that the real form of Marxism, socialism, communism that they will impose is international in its scope, an international solution which we are to assume makes it above criticism. So we might as well call it what it is: world domination, the ultimate power grab. There is no good reason to declare not the Nazi form of fascism an imminent consequence of American right-wing politics. The American right, or even far right, were it to implement its desires without impediment, would be something like unchecked libertarianism through minimal or no government. And yes, sure, there are some people on the American right who actually advocate for this. But this would result in anarchy and chaos, not authoritarian rule. However, the overwhelming majority of conservative or right-wing Americans are not calling for anarchy in any way, and it is absurd to suggest it. Still, social justice advocates want to express their definition of their enemies, which is every moderate or right-wing person, as Nazis and fascists and the greatest evil imaginable. The sophisticated answer to the simplistic political spectrum is that it should be not viewed as just a simple two-dimensional line with Nazis on the far right and happy-loving Marxists on the far left. There are a few different ways to look at a more robust political spectrum, and they are all more than a simple bidirectional arrow. Yet the social justice advocates need the equation to be that simple. They are here to prevent Nazi fascism from happening again, as if it happens all the time when no one is paying any attention. They are happy to use the same tactics as Nazi fascists: authoritarian rule, severe repression, the things I listed before. They don't care what they do in practice if it overlaps with Nazi fascism, with authoritarian rule, because, well, free people are dangerous people. They don't care if they persecute internal enemies, because free speech might lead to fascism. They would like to co-opt business for their kind of oppression, because fascists should not have credit cards. Oh, they love scapegoating. You see, straight white males are evil fuckers. And aggression to their neighbors. You see, their policies are not limited to America. Their aim is one of a happy, loving, worldwide government. And never mind if you can't find any Nazis hiding anywhere or sending secret dog whistles to each other. They have redefined the terms, such that nearly everyone can be found guilty, in some way, if necessary, when they have to. Need more evidence? As I write this letter, earlier today, a trash D-list Hollywood actress is threatening a multinational hotel company called Hyatt with a boycott. And she's getting national attention for it because Hyatt actually provided lodging and meeting space for her political enemy's yearly conference. It's called CPAC. But she didn't call it that. No, she calls her enemies, the conservatives, that is, Nazis and fascists in the same sentence. Why would she do this? Well, Marriott, as you see, said back in January that they will not be hosting Nazis or fascists at any point. China, however, is A-OK with Marriott. You see, Marriott's declaration underscores the fact that businesses are falling over themselves to volunteer to censor everything in order to help along the new narrative from the dominant party. The social justice movement has so thoroughly won the culture war that they do not have to force much upon us anymore. You see, the most powerful businesses will just jump in and take it from here. More than this, more than anything else, this, when business gets involved, that is textbook fascism. So, as I like to end all of these videos with, what can be done? What can we do? Well, as usual, we can follow the philosopher's lead and insist on precise definitions. We can shout from whatever stage we can still find that social justice advocates are using totalitarian techniques. Most people still know what that term means and why it encompasses Nazi, Soviet, and Maoist hell. Finally, you can live with integrity and try to see the good in people. Try to model the behavior of a healthy society in your interactions with everything. It's the least you can do, but it matters. Thanks for watching. More videos to come in just about every 2 weeks.